process. And I know that my neighborhood councils in Venice, West LA, and Mar Vista are focused on this airport. And I also know that other people on the west side who have to deal with those jets coming down and landing or taking off and going over them. It impacts the quality of life on everybody on the west side. So it's a bigger issue than just us neighbors around it. But again, thank you to Marty and Joan for their leadership. Come on up, Marty, and it's time for you to introduce the panel that's coming before us. And then we're going to ask the panelists to come on up now. And what's going to happen as the next step in this is the panel will each do 3 to 5 minutes and update us real quickly. Then there'll be some questions. When they're finished, we're then going to open it to the public for you to respond to what you've heard and also to talk about your personal situation about how this airport's toxicity of its jets are impacting you. This is important testimony for the record as we go forward with our actions on any level of government that it has to be done. The federal level of government, the FAA, and the new administration coming in will be something that will have an impact on it. Obviously, the state legislation that Ted Lieu is working on. And I want to say this about what Ted's trying to do. Ted is trying to get a piece of legislation that actually investigates that fumes and questions what it is. We need that data so that the justification of what you will hear anecdotally from some of you can be proven. That data has to be collected. There are some concerns about collecting the data by some politicians because you know what that does. That gives credibility, and that is the smoking gun that we all know is out there that can be anecdotally talked about, but there's nothing like scientific data. So as I turn it over to Marty, I just want you to give them a round of applause because they're the experts that are helping us through this situation. And I'd like to turn it over to Marty. I'm going to step off the stage for a bit, but I'll be back up. Thanks.
I extend our deepest thanks and appreciation to both Councilman Rosendahl and Assemblyman Ted Lieu, who have been in the forefront of spearheading and moving our issues forward and exposing the realism of what we are living with. I also want to mention that one of our panel of experts, who I've known since pretty much when I started with this issue, Bill Piazza from the Los Angeles Unified School District, was involved with a health risk assessment when I was attending the working group back in the late 1990s. And he also went to Sacramento to help with Ted Lieu's legislation on both bills. So I want to thank Bill Piazza for doing that. And I'll introduce, starting with Bill Piazza, who I've just introduced. Of the 4 scientists here, 3 were on the panel, and Philip Fine was the scientist who was at the helm of the South Coast AQMD airport study, who was in charge of doing the measurements and all the laborious, hard scientific work that went behind taking the samples for the 1-year study, which we'll hear more about in a minute. And LA County Department of Health Services, Cyrus Rangan, who I periodically see on the TV as he's talking about issues of health around the county. He's been, as well as the others, giving of his time when we had the panel of experts, and very much appreciate his input. And then also, well, I consider them all my friends. I really am honored to work with them. I learn as we move forward with this more and more. Jean Hospital has been wonderful in helping me to learn, inviting me to the AQMD seminars, and just been wonderful in that respect. So let's give a huge round of applause for their efforts on our behalf and others' behalf as well. What I'd like to do now is ask each of the panel of expert members to weigh in a brief summary of their thoughts of what we did over that 1-year period and how they feel this process will move forward. We'll start with Jean Hospital from South Coast AQMD.
Thanks, Marty, and thanks for inviting us here. Always glad to participate. As you've heard, it was about 2 years ago when we held this town hall meeting here previously, and at that time I talked about a study we were just starting at Santa Monica and Van Nuys airports. It wasn't a health study or an odor study, but it was aimed at looking to see if we could find gradients of air pollutant levels that might be related to aircraft operations. And the bulk of the work of that study has been done. Staff under Dr. Fine is now putting a draft report together on the findings, and he'll speak a bit more about that. But what I do want to do is just make a shameless plug for a report that the district has just released on air toxics in the South Coast Air Basin. This is the third study the district has done over the past decades, looking at levels of toxic air contaminants throughout Southern California. It wasn't aimed at airports or any other specific sources. It was aimed at monitoring the levels throughout the Southern California area. The report's available on our website, www.aqmd.gov. There's a little rolling banner on the bottom that you click on, and it'll take you to a link to the report. I'd encourage any of you who are interested in air toxics levels in Southern California to take a look at it. We're very interested in comments from the public and from our expert advisors on the draft report. And in it, there's a map of risks throughout the air basin, and you can kind of see where the Santa Monica Airport area is and see how those toxic air contaminant levels compare to other regions of the Southern California Air Basin. Just to briefly give a summary of the results, the good news is levels of air toxics are going down. Since the first time to the second time to the third time we measured them, they're going down. The not so good or the bad news is levels of toxics are still elevated. It still gives us a risk that staff at AQMD thinks is not acceptable for an involuntary exposure, and we would welcome any comments that you might have on it. Thank you.
Can I interrupt just for a second and maybe get Jean to just mention about the panel of experts, how you felt that went and what your feelings were about that when we met for the 4 times?
Gee, you're taxing my memory on that one. The task of the panel, I think, was to come up with what sort of scientific information would be useful or what sort of study we could do to assess the health impacts of aircraft emission at the Santa Monica Airport. So I think we mentioned a number of possibilities. Of course, all of those take funding, and there have been some efforts to try to generate funding for that.